Welcome to r/entitledparents, where parents get other children sick intentionally and expect a thank you in return. When I was in kindergarten, Entitled Boy came to class one day with chickenpox. This wasn't a mild case either. The spots were angry and red, and within a few hours a couple of our classmates were itching. My teacher had immediately called his parents, but they refused to pick him up, saying that it would be good for the other children to be around him and asking her to just leave him in the classroom. Now, only about half of my class had gotten their chickenpox shots at this point. My parents were really good about getting my brothers and I our shots when we were supposed to get them, but as this was early in the school year, a lot of parents hadn't gotten their kids vaccinated for chickenpox yet. To enroll in kindergarten at my elementary school, you have to either vaccinate your kids before the school year starts or within 3 months after. My teacher didn't know what to do. The office told her that if the parents wanted the kid to remain in class, she was technically supposed to let him unless other parents complained or the principal deemed him a danger to the other students. The principal was over at the high school on the other side of the city. He was principal of both, weird Christian school thing. He would rush over when he could, but because of the school handbook, the entitled boy had to remain in class. My teacher asked the school secretary to call our parents, but she only had the home number for most parents and ended up with a lot of answering machines. So in kindergarten, everyone sat at table groups, and I was at Entitled Boy's table. He was carrying on like normal, yelling about Power Rangers. I was also the only kid at our little table who had been vaccinated. I remember feeling bad because one of the girls was scheduled to get her shot the next day. Talk about bad luck. A lot of the kids at my table started itching, and the girl who was supposed to get her shot the next day showed me her arm, and she had very faint pink dots. I don't know if chickenpox usually moves that quickly or if Entitled Boy just had a super mutant strand, but I was freaked out. I know I had gotten a shot that my mom promised would protect me from getting sick, but I was also 5 and still thought Stitch from Lilo and Stitch was a real being who lived in Hawaii. I was convinced that touching Entitled Boy would mean I would die from chickenpox. So my friends and I all avoided him like he had, well, the plague. Finally, the principal bursts into the room and kneels down in front of Entitled Boy. He asks Entitled Boy to please come with him so they can call his parents together. About 20 minutes later, the entitled parents show up. The doo-doo hits the fan. Entitled mom starts screaming about how both she and her husband are licensed chiropractors and know all about the evils of vaccines and how vaccines give people autism. My oldest brother has Asperger's. If this had happened like 5 years later, I could have roasted the heck out of these anti-vaxxers for their stupidity. Entitled dad tries to calm entitled mom down, but also quietly tells my principal that as licensed chiropractors, they know and have seen how vaccines not only give children autism, but also make them gay. As a lesbian, I again could have roasted the stuffing out of them had this taken place years later. My principal firmly tells them that Entitled Boy needs to go home and can only come back when he is no longer sick. Entitled parents try to fight back, but my principal is firm, and Entitled Boy is dragged away from class begging his parents for a new Power Rangers toy. As the week went on, more and more of my classmates dropped like flies, until only about 7 of us remained. We were the lucky 7 who had been vaccinated prior to the start of the school year, and since most of the class was homesick, we got to play a ton of games and pick out the books we wanted to read. Usually the class voted, and we 7 were among the outvoted group. After a few days, my classmates began to return, not a red spot in sight. But it was a few weeks later that the real kicker happened. The entitled parents sent out emails to all the parents of kids in my class, painting themselves as the victims and heroes for exposing the class to life's natural vaccine. My dad got mad because even though I didn't get sick, thanks parents who were on top of my vaccinations, y'all rock, a lot of my classmates did. The entitled parents asked for a thank you from the other parents, and needless to say, they got no thank yous and only a lot of passive-aggressive remarks and glares in the hallway. Also, don't feel too bad for Entitled Boy. He turned out to be one of the biggest entitled D-bags I've ever met. I went to school with him all the way up through high school, and he's one of the worst humans I've had the displeasure of dealing with. The entitled apple doesn't fall far from the entitled tree. Why do these parents keep talking about how they're chiropractors? What does being a chiropractor have to do with knowing anything about vaccines? Yes, as a professional YouTuber, I know for a fact that not subscribing to this channel causes autism. So if you know what's good for you, you had better subscribe to my channel. My mom is the oldest of 4 children and gave birth to me a few months before her youngest sister, let's call her Cruella, gave birth to my cousin, Maleficent. From the day she brought Maleficent home, Cruella groomed my cousin to be a beauty pageant kid. She started getting Maleficent's hair done as soon as she could and raised Maleficent to only wear dresses and very dainty shoes. When I briefly lived with my aunt, she used the money my mom sent home to provide for my care to get Maleficent new clothes and hair. Cruella had a full-time job as a grocery store cashier and also received child support from Maleficent's father, who was in the US Air Force, but she spent thousands of dollars on making sure her daughter was always beauty pageant ready. When we got older, I was a grade level ahead of Maleficent. Cruella made Maleficent compete with me academically, regardless of the difference in our classes. We were both good students and lived in different states, but Cruella would call my mom once a month and would ask detailed questions about my report cards. If mom told her that I earned all A's, Cruella would implement various punishments until Maleficent had just as good or better grades. At first, Cruella would belittle her own daughter with taunts. Then she would deny buying Maleficent any cookies, toys, etc. until her grades improved. When we started hitting our growth spurts, Cruella would make Maleficent wear old dresses and shoes that were way too small until her grades improved. Naturally, this made life difficult for me and my mom. Maleficent grew to resent me, and she often did petty things to get me in trouble, like breaking my grandma's doll collection, breaking dishes, and even fought me a couple of times when I refused to be bullied. Mom stopped discussing my grades with Cruella, which worked until Mom and I moved back to her hometown where Cruella lived and enrolled in the same school as Maleficent. Then Cruella began to volunteer at the school on report card days just to find out what my grades and Maleficent's grades were. This continued into our college years. I ended up dropping out of college after 3 semesters as I had developed a drinking problem. I had to undergo a few months of treatment. Maleficent was enrolled in college by this time, and Cruella maintained her streak of competition by calling my mom to report how well my cousin was doing before snidely pointing out that I was no longer in college. I changed phone numbers after Cruella called me one day to tell me that Maleficent was applying to study abroad, then asked me how my borderline minimum wage retail job was going. The irony was that Maleficent would end up being a 4th-year junior in college when I was finally returned to college. More on that later. By the time I returned to college, our grandma, mom and Cruella's mom, was in a nursing home due to dementia-related problems. She had been diagnosed while we were in high school, but the disease was progressing rapidly. Mom, being the eldest child, quit her job to spend every day at the nursing home, talking to grandma, reading to grandma, etc. Mom wanted to have Grandma return to Grandma's home, but Cruella refused. Cruella had secured power of executor of the state shortly after Grandma's diagnosis, meaning she had the ability to place Grandma in the home despite her siblings' protests. It also meant that Cruella technically had ownership of Grandma's home and the land on which it sat. Fast forward a couple of years. Maleficent began dating a local pastor's son, let's call him Charming, and they got engaged in April after dating for 3 months. Cruella, coincidentally, was good friends with Charming's mother. Cruella wasted no time in bragging to my mom about how Maleficent was engaged to be married. At this time, I was graduating from college, which really got under Cruella's skin. I still didn't talk directly to her, but I did keep up communication with my cousin. When I talked to her about the upcoming wedding, Maleficent revealed that Cruella was planning to take Grandma off life support and would use the money from Grandma's estate and insurance to pay for a lavish wedding. Maleficent also revealed that she did not want to marry Charming, was fed up with college, she was a 7th-year senior, basically living the life Cruella had created for her. I mentioned to my mom what Maleficent had said about taking Grandma off life support, and Mom was livid. She called Maleficent, and they crafted the revenge together. Revenge. In June, Cruella decided to host a very over-the-top party to celebrate the engagement. Mom and I chose not to attend as we chose to visit Grandma in the hospital together that night. So Cruella's actions were reported to me by Maleficent herself, but I'm going to phrase them. Cruella had organized the evening so that the parents of the engaged couple and the engaged couple could stand to tell everyone in the room how amazing their respective families were. Charming and his parents had already gushed their praises for Cruella, and it was Maleficent's turn. Maleficent thanked Cruella for raising her, thanked Charming's parents for raising such a good son, then announced that the wedding was off. She took the opportunity to tell Charming that she did care about him, but would not marry him just because it was what their families expected from soon-to-be parents. Maleficent then left the party and spent the night with one of her friends from high school. This humiliated Cruella on a personal and financial level. She had already paid non-refundable deposits for a caterer, wedding reception hall, dress, limo, etc., and she was out hundreds of dollars. Furthermore, Cruella and Charming's parents were very against premarital sex, which made Maleficent's unexpected announcement even more appalling. Cruella had planned to keep their pregnancy as hidden as possible with the dress she had selected, the floral arrangement, etc., and Maleficent was expected to remain complicit. She called Maleficent and raged at her several times, but Maleficent stood her ground. She returned the car Cruella had bought for her and informed Cruella that she was dropping out of college as well, which would leave Cruella thousands of dollars in debt from student loans. Their drama took a back seat when Grandma passed away in early August. Maleficent had gotten a job in a corporate office by then and showed up to the funeral looking very happy and very pregnant. After the funeral, we had a reception and Cruella called me, Mom, Maleficent, and my uncle and other aunt into a room together to announce that she was going to sell Grandma's house and land and would split up Grandma's life insurance policy money as she saw fit. It was the expected announcement from her, and she phrased it as something Grandma would have wanted. I don't know who was smiling bigger, Mom or Maleficent, when they announced that they were contesting her power as executor of the estate. As Grandma's diagnosis of dementia had been announced just days before Cruella secured her position, Mom had consulted a lawyer to contest the decisions Cruella had made. Mom and Cruella ended up going to court and the matter was resolved less than a year later. Cruella's position as executor of the estate was overruled due to Grandma's mental capacity at the time. This meant that outside of a life insurance policy Cruella had taken on Grandma, she received no money directly. Maleficent is paying off her student loans, but Cruella is still paying off other debts from living beyond her means. Mom agreed to let Maleficent and her daughter move into Grandma's old house, and she and Charming are co-parenting. If you like this story, then I would recommend checking out r/slash raised by narcissists. It's actually one of my favorite subreddits, but I'm not really sure if I want to cover it here on this channel because the stories can be kinda heavy, because they often involve stories of abuse. I was in a terrible accident a few years ago, other drivers at fault. A long litany of BS ensued. Even though I have a history of dramatic and effective volunteer work at my kid's school, I'm not from here and therefore can't be trusted, so a bunch of controversy ensued. Basically, my husband was approached a few times by parents who didn't want me wearing orthopedic braces for my injuries because it scared their kids, didn't want me limping because it was depressing to see, etc. After my resulting spinal surgery, my kids were getting so much flack about my spinal brace, had I taken it off, I'd have died, that I wound up being formally asked not to show my face on school grounds till I was out of it. This year, I'm out of the spinal brace but have a giant scar on my neck. You have to get clearance from the cops to be on my kid's school campus, which I got. You go in, either your license is scanned and you get a sticker badge, or they know your face and give you your formal printed badge. There was no formal printed badge made for me this year for some reason. So I turned in my sticker badge after a meeting one day and the school police officer and some parents immediately walked in. The front desk sub, whom I'd never talked to, but one of the crowd who'd pearl clutch and give me the stink eye. "We've talked about this. You need police clearance to be on school grounds around these children." I have clearance through the police. Let me pull up the email. "Yours is expired. You have to get it every year." I did. "You did not." I wound up being detained by the officer and late to work, who, after my name was smeared, determined that I did have clearance. Also, the entitled mom would have known that if she was scanning my license to get in. She wouldn't have been able to print me a badge. After comments on my neck, I was allowed to go to the office. I filed a complaint with the district and had a formal badge printed the next day. I think I'm starting to learn the entitled mom cycle. First, it's limping scares the children, don't walk around my little boy. So they get into a wheelchair. Then it's, give my son your wheelchair. He's tired and you're clearly not paralyzed. So if you're disabled and around an entitled parent, I think the only safe option is to crawl on your hands and knees. That was r/entitledparents, and don't forget, not subscribing to this channel causes autism, so you better hit that big red button if you know what's good for you.